Approximately 2,700 years ago, the first settlers set foot on the peninsula where modern-day Istanbul stands. They were a group of Greek colonists from Megara, led by a young leader named Byzas. They had sailed east to establish a new city. According to legend, they had consulted the oracle at Delphi. The oracle told them, "Settle opposite the land of the blind." The meaning of this cryptic advice only became clear when they reached the Bosphorus. On the eastern shore of the strait, in what is now known as Kadikoy, then called Kalkadan, there was already a settlement. But the opposite shore, Sarayburnu, was far more suitable with its natural harbor and elevated terrain. Who could build a city facing such an ideal location and ignore it? Only the blind, it seemed. The land of the blind had been found. And so, in 667 BCE, a small city was founded, Byzantium. Modest in its beginnings, it would one day become the heart of empires. Its name would change, but its soul would remain in the same place. Byzantium continued to exist for centuries as a small but strategic port city. As the Roman Empire expanded, the importance of this city grew. Trade routes between east and west passed through here. It was the gateway to the Black Sea. By the 4th century CE, Roman Emperor Constantine was planning to divide the empire into east and west. Rome, in the west, had become politically and economically weakened. Constantine sought a new capital in the east, and he set his sights on Byzantium. The city was ideal due to its location and defensive advantages. In 330 CE, a massive construction initiative began. The old city was expanded with new walls, roads, public squares, and monumental structures. Pagan temples were replaced by churches. And that year, it was officially declared the new capital of the Roman Empire. Its new name, Constantinople, the city of Constantine. From that moment on, Byzantium was no longer just a city. It had become the heart of the Eastern world. Constantinople was not just a new name, but the beginning of a new era. The Eastern Roman Empire, later known as the Byzantine Empire, was born here and would rule for centuries to come. Constantinople was now the capital of an empire. A city that carried the legacy of Rome into the east. It served for centuries as the center of the Eastern Roman Empire, also known as Byzantium. It was not only a political capital, but also a symbol of faith and civilization. With the rise of Christianity, the city experienced a great leap in architecture and the arts. The most magnificent structure of the era was undoubtedly Hagia Sophia. Commissioned in 537 by Emperor Justinian, this colossal cathedral became not only the greatest monument of Byzantium but also one of the largest structures of the medieval world. Its marble came from Anatolia, its columns from ancient temples. According to legend, upon its completion, Justinian exclaimed, "Solomon, I have surpassed you." Hagia Sophia was not alone. The city's walls were expanded. The Theodosian walls, still standing today, protected Constantinople from invasions for centuries. The Hippodrome was a massive center of politics and entertainment, gathering thousands of people. Palaces, forums, and aqueducts made the city not just a capital, but a living organism. But over time, the empire began to weaken. Political strife, external invasions, and economic hardship gradually eroded Byzantium. In 1204, during the Fourth Crusade, the city was plundered. Captured by the Latins, Constantinople suffered one of the harshest blows in its history. In 1261, it was recaptured by the Byzantines, but its former glory was never fully restored. Still, even in decline, the city resisted. Behind its walls, a culture, a faith, and a legacy lived on, until that final moment, in 1453. Toward the end of the 13th century, a small principality emerged on the western edge of Anatolia, right along the borders of the Byzantine Empire. It was led by a man named Osman Gazi. This principality, which would soon bear his name, laid the foundations for an empire that would last for centuries, the Ottomans. Initially a modest frontier power, the Ottoman Beylik grew rapidly thanks to smart governance, a spirit of tolerance, and a powerful military system. After capturing Bursa and Edirne, they expanded into the Balkans, Anatolia, and the Middle East. But their eyes were always on Constantinople. The city had become a weary capital. Its walls were still grand, but the empire within them had long lost its power. Sultan Mehmed II of the Ottomans, later known as Mehmed the Conqueror, prepared for a long time to take this ancient city. In the spring of 1453, the Ottoman army arrived at the city's gates. A siege lasting weeks began, with immense determination from both land and sea. To bypass the massive chain blocking the Golden Horn, the Ottomans famously transported their ships overland. Massive cannons battered the walls. And finally, on the morning of May 29, 1453, the city fell. Constantinople became the capital of the Ottoman Empire. Renamed Constantini, it was transformed into the political and cultural heart of the empire. But this was not just a change in rule, it was the beginning of a massive transformation. Hagia Sophia was converted into a mosque. Across the city, madrasas, mosques, libraries, and bazaars were built. Empty neighborhoods were repopulated with people from Anatolia, the Balkans, and various regions. Different faiths, languages, and cultures continued to live side by side. The conquest of Istanbul was not only a regional power shift. In Europe, it marked the end of the Middle Ages and the beginning of the modern era. This event shifted the balance of power in the West. It sparked major awakenings in science, art, and thought. Many historians agree that scholars fleeing Byzantium after the fall of Constantinople helped fuel the rise of the Renaissance in Europe by carrying their accumulated knowledge westward. Thus, this city did not merely witness the end of one age, it also heralded the birth of another. For centuries, the city would be known as Constantini, but in the Republican era, its name would officially become Istanbul. Yet, no matter what name it bore, this city continued to beat as the heart of East and West. When the Republic was proclaimed in 1923, the capital was moved to Ankara. Istanbul, after centuries of serving as the seat of empires, now continued its existence as one of the cultural and economic centers of the new Turkey. In the early years of the Republic, Istanbul stood quietly but firmly with its former grandeur. Though it was no longer the capital, it remained the country's largest and most influential city. From the 1950s onward, major transformations began. The population rapidly increased. A wave of migration from rural to urban areas began to reshape the city. New roads were opened, transportation networks expanded, and large buildings began to rise. This period marked a massive construction boom. But this rapid growth also brought with it a lack of planning. In the 1960s and 70s, informal settlements, known as Gecekondu neighborhoods, began to spread across the city. Alongside Istanbul's historic silhouette, an uncontrolled wave of urbanization took hold. In the 1980s and 90s, new districts formed on the city's outskirts. Shopping malls, industrial zones, bridges, and highways transformed the urban fabric. By then, Istanbul was no longer just a city, it had become a metropolis. In the 2000s, the pace of transformation accelerated even more. Skyscrapers, residential complexes, highways, and tunnels sprang up everywhere. Historical neighborhoods were replaced with modern housing developments. The shadows of wooden mansions along the Bosphorus were cast over by concrete towers. As nature receded, the city was increasingly swallowed by a sea of concrete. Yet despite all these changes, Istanbul remains mesmerizing. The sunlight hitting the dome of Hagia Sophia, the cry of a seagull passing over the Bosphorus, the golden reflection of sunset on the shores of the Golden Horn. Istanbul still takes your breath away. Here, history is felt with every step. Beneath every stone lies an empire, in the courtyard of every mosque a civilization, at every street corner a whisper from the past. At every street corner a whisper from the past. No matter how much it changes, Istanbul is a city that never loses its beauty. A city that resists time, and carries both its past and its future in the same breath. And perhaps that's why, no matter what happens, Istanbul always remains a place to begin again. Today, Istanbul is not only the largest city in Turkey, but also one of the biggest and most dynamic metropolises in the world. According to official figures, its population exceeds 16 million, and during the day, with commuters from surrounding provinces, this number climbs even higher. Istanbul is more than a city, it's almost a country unto itself. Economically, it is the center of Turkey's production power, foreign trade, and finance sector. With its banks, corporate headquarters, tech offices, and logistics hubs, the city forms the backbone of the national economy. Yet this economic vitality brings with it deep inequalities. Luxury residences exist side by side with slums, skyscrapers shadow historic districts, and people with vastly different income levels live shoulder to shoulder. This coexistence feeds the complex, layered soul of the city. Its socio-cultural structure is perhaps the most defining feature of Istanbul. People of all religions, backgrounds, and cultures live together here. The city has absorbed waves of migration from every corner of Anatolia, and carries traces of Greek, Armenian, Jewish, and Levantine heritage. From the Middle East to the Balkans, many voices echo in its streets. Today, Istanbul is at once a festival stage, a traffic jam, a cultural capital, and a place of daily struggle. On one hand, it hosts international art biennials, fashion weeks, and film festivals. On the other, people trying to make ends meet by collecting waste live just around the corner. The city's expansion challenges not only its social fabric, but also its natural environment. Istanbul now lives under the threat of water scarcity. For much of the year, reservoirs remain below capacity, and underground water sources are diminishing. Meanwhile, the city's remaining forests are increasingly overshadowed by concrete. The northern forests, once vast and lush, are shrinking due to infrastructure projects and urban sprawl. As Istanbul loses its green, it also loses its breath. All these contradictions don't make Istanbul a city of problems, they make it a living organism. This is a city in constant transformation, showing a different face every morning. And no matter how much it grows, Istanbul still stands, just as it did on the very first day, as a gateway between history and life. Hagia Sophia. Rising at the heart of Istanbul, Hagia Sophia is not just a building, it is time itself. Standing for more than 1,500 years, this monument has served as a church, a mosque, a museum, and again a mosque. Every dome bears the trace of an era, every column echoes the voice of a civilization. Anyone who steps inside doesn't just feel history, they feel the legacy of humanity. So close that the voices of muezzins from its minarets overlap, stands Sultanahmet Mosque. Sultanahmet Mosque and Square. With its mesmerizing blue tiles, the Sultanahmet Mosque, also known as the Blue Mosque, is a symbol of elegance and balanced design. With its 6 minarets, it reflects how the Ottoman Empire blended devotion with aesthetics. The square in front of it is a stage stretching from Byzantium to the Ottomans. The footsteps of history still echo here. Walk through this square and head toward the gates of the palace. A world that once hosted sultans, viziers, poets, and queens awaits you. Topkapi Palace. For hundreds of years, Topkapi Palace was home to Ottoman sultans, a place where grandeur and simplicity, power and solitude, coexisted. Each courtyard, each gate whispers a different tale. In the harem, intrigue walks hand in hand with grace, while in the chamber of sacred relics, the meaning of time transforms. And from a few kilometers away, someone has been silently watching over Topkapi for centuries. Galata Tower. Standing like a stone sentinel completing the city's silhouette, Galata Tower has watched over Istanbul for centuries. Once an observation post, later a fire watchtower, today it's the destination for those wanting to see the city from above. Legend says that couples who gaze at the view together from this tower never part ways. Speaking of towers, there is one rising alone in the middle of the Bosphorus. Its story is both distant and familiar. Maiden's Tower. Standing in solitude at the heart of the Bosphorus, the Maiden's Tower is one of Istanbul's most romantic silhouettes. Just like its legends, its misty mornings and glowing sunsets are equally enchanting. Sometimes a fortress, sometimes a lighthouse, this tower has always been part of a fairy tale. But Istanbul isn't only a city of the past and silence. Sometimes it's crowded, loud, the very sound of life itself. Taksim Square and Istiklal Street. Taksim is the heart of modern Istanbul, Istiklal Street, its lifeline. From people walking alone in the crowds to street musicians, from the nostalgic tram to historic buildings, every detail speaks the rhythm of the city. This isn't just a place for shopping or entertainment, it's the living memory of Istanbul. And if one day you want to leave all this hustle behind, hop on a ferry. Another face of Istanbul awaits you, right in the middle of the sea. The Prince's Islands. Far from the city, yet still part of it. Bukada, the largest of the Prince's Islands, is a journey through time with its elegant streets, old mansions, and quiet coves. The horse carriages are gone, bicycles have taken their place, but the island has preserved its calm and nostalgic charm. And if you ever want to take home a memory from Istanbul, something more than an object, something that carries the spirit of centuries. Grand Bazaar and Spice Bazaar. The Grand Bazaar is not just a market, it's a universe. Its labyrinthine alleys, domes, and the aroma of spices and gold carry voices of centuries. The Spice Bazaar is a stage where color, scent, and crowd merge. Here, shopping is a ritual, and bargaining is a tradition. Seeing Istanbul is not enough. If you truly want to feel it, you must taste it. Because this city is not just made of stone and history, it is also the city of scents, flavors, and an indescribable culinary memory. The smell of dough rising from a bakery in the early morning, the steam of strong tea on a ferry, the smoke of grilled fish sandwiches on the Galata Bridge, all speak a language unique to this city. Every district tells a different culinary story. The scent of mazes drifting through a fish restaurant by the Bosphorus shore, or the rich, spicy aroma of kokoreç sizzling on a street cart grill. And of course, the kebabs, Adana, Urfa, Iskender. Each one carries the spirit of its hometown to Istanbul's countless grill houses. And of course, the world-famous Turkish desserts, baklava, kadayif, tulumba, and so many others, each one a masterpiece of sweetness and tradition. Istanbul is also a capital of empires when it comes to food. Here, meals are not just for filling the stomach, eating becomes a journey into the past, a ritual of meaning. Each bite is a trace of culture. This city is the shared kitchen of civilizations that met at a crossroad. For centuries, Istanbul has served as the capital of empires, a crossroads of religions, languages, and cultures. This is a city shaped by history carved into its stones, and a life that flows through its streets, constantly rebuilding itself day after day. Today, it may be crowded, chaotic, and exhausting. But still, in every corner, there's a story. In every view, there's meaning. Istanbul is a city that carries the traces of the past into the present, and still has something to say to the future. And that's why it is worth telling.